Good afternoon. My name is Butch Bateman. I'm a board member of the Heritage Museum of Montgomery County. Today is January the 5th, 2012. Today we're here to interview Mr. George Strake and his experience in Montgomery County and Conroe. He has a large background. He's a local Houston graduate of Houston St. Thomas.
St. Thomas.
Graduate of
Notre Dame.
Harvard went to the Navy.
School, went to the Navy.
Came back and got your MBA at Harvard.
That's correct.
So on behalf of the museum and Mr. Sam Cable, our videographer, Mr. Strake, it's a real pleasure.
Appreciate you guys preserving that history up there.
We're glad to do it.
You bet.
Please start with when did you come upon this this great earth of ours?
June 10, 1935.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were born here in Houston?
Born here in Houston. I
Okay.
was the third of three children. Actually, my dad and mom had a boy that would have been a year and a half older than me, but he died at 2 days old of asthma.
Oh my gosh.
6 months before Dr. Bloxham here in town discovered the incubator, which would have been no problem to sail through the asthma at that young age. But yes, I'm the third of three.
Okay. So we obviously know as Mr. Cale and I were driving to Houston today, we got on Interstate 45 and there was a big sign that said Camp Strake.
Camp Strake.
So please tell us a little bit about your family history as it relates to Montgomery County.
Sure. Well, let me go back a little bit and give you a brief history of my dad.
Please.
He was the 11th of 11 children. His mother had 7 children by the first husband, and then he married her deceased husband's brother, and she had 3 children by him, and so that meant that he was the 10th of 10 children. They had no money. They lived in St. Louis. They went to his first job was as a Western Union runner, and he made $10 a week and put $2 a week in the collection basket. And he was always, his mother was a very devout Catholic, and it turned him into a very knowledgeable Catholic. He was well read and worked hard. Didn't go to high school. Took an entrance exam to St. Louis University and passed that and graduated from there. Not sure what year that was, but he had a business and commerce degree. So his next important thing was he went to Florida as a wireless instructor in the Army Air Corps in World War I, and he fell in love with a lady down in Florida, and she with him, and he wouldn't marry her because she had more money than he did, and he just wouldn't. That wasn't in his makeup. So anyway, she said, if I were a young man ambitious, I would go to Mexico. That's where the fortunes are going to be made. So he went to Tampico, got a job heading the accounting department for Gulf Oil Company. Worked at that job for 2 years down there. In the interim period, married my mother, had my oldest sister, Susie, in 1925. In Mexico, he started noticing Americans down there putting drilling deals together. And he, interestingly enough, his neighbor at the time was the parents of William F. Buckley Jr.
Oh my God.
And Buckley's father was the one that saw this developing interest of Americans in Mexico, went to New York, convinced the New York banks to fund these Americans that were going down there. Well, the Mexicans got so upset at that they not only passed a law, they passed a constitutional amendment saying that no foreigners could own minerals in Mexico. Thus you have Pemex, which is a big, giant, bulbous company that doesn't have the advantage of competition.
So your dad went to New York or Buckley?
Buckley.
Buckley.
Okay, so my dad quit golf after 2 years, and he started putting these drilling deals together. And he saw wherever there was a discovery, there was an outcropping of the La Guardia Reynosa sand. And that was to later play a part in the Conroe
Right.
experience too.
Right.
So when the Mexican federal government started putting pressure on him, he told Mother, he said, let's go to Cuba and let's lease up the island of Cuba, and we'll see if there's oil down there. So to give himself some cash flow, he took on the Hutmobile dealership, which was the forerunner of Oldsmobile. And he didn't know it, but they were in the midst of what they call the sugar depression. And he said, in Cuba, in Havana. And he said he couldn't give those cars away. They were selling the black Model Ts and black Model As, and to sell them, he was painting them red and chartreuse and green and everything, which was unusual in those days. But he said the Cubans wouldn't buy a car if they were given one, because they were in the sugar depression, and they were hard put. So he had assembled about $250,000 when he left Mexico for Cuba, and he got down there, and he was concerned, and that and by the way, that was when there was 1% income tax.
What year was this?
Let me see. That had to be
He was a
plus or minus. That had to be about 1928.
I mean, he had amassed a great deal of money for that
For
time.
that
and
amount
era.
of time, yeah, and no tax, and it was, a dollar was a dollar.
So he was
Sure.
very successful in Mexico.
Yeah, very successful in Mexico. Saved his money. Went to Cuba, lost most of it, and told Mother, he said, we got to go back to the United States, get back before we have to swim back. So he came back, and he was going to go to Oregon to go in the lumbering business. And Mother's mother, who was from Houston, got sick, and so it looked like it was going to be a lingering illness. They didn't want to leave and go up there, and transportation was not as easy then as it is now. But as to give himself something to do, he started looking for similar areas that they were discovering oil in Mexico, but in this area here. And he opened an office in a motel over in Hemp Hill, Texas, which is on the Louisiana-Texas line. And what happened from that, I really can't tell you much about it because it never succeeded. But at the same time, he was over here searching around the Conroe area, Montgomery County, and he noticed that there were similar outcroppings, what looked like to him, and he was not a geologist, but he read books on it, of the Liquora ruinosa sand that was productive down in Mexico.
Was it an outcropping? Is
An
that
outcropping,
color?
yeah. And he not only noticed the natural flow of creeks and bayous in Texas was always to the southeast into the Gulf of Mexico. But he noticed it in that southeast area, just southeast of Conroe, that there was an unnatural turn back to the northwest of the bayous. And he thought, well, that's kind of suspicious. He would walk in those backwoods and the Palmetto Flats back in the areas there, and he would talk to the farmers, and they'd say their cattle wouldn't drink the water because it was so brackish. He said there was like a sheen on those low areas and where the Palmetto Flats were, and he noticed this outcropping that were significant to him, and he just became convinced there was oil there. So he tried to he started leasing, and he did his own leasing, would sit in the kitchens of the
Remember
local
how
folks.
much money it was an acre then?
I think he paid, I want to say he paid about $5 an acre.
$5 an acre.
Yeah.
For mineral rights? To buy the property or just
Right.
mineral rights?
And the main lease he bought was from a company called the South Texas Development Company out of Albany, New York. And they were going to subdivide that area down there. But I guess the Depression came along, and they couldn't do it. But
Subdivided for homes?
for homes,
And,
yeah.
and it had palmettos.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
We,
You and I can laugh about that.
hopefully they're up on stanchions or something. But anyway, then he went to 8 different, he started blocking this acreage up, and he got about 8,000 acres put together. And he started looking for people that would drill him a well for a half interest in the 8,000 acres. He was turned down by 8 different major oil companies. And one of them told him, they said, "Oh, Mr. Strake, you got too big a field for our company," kind of sarcastically, and it really stung him. So he went home after being totally frustrated by it, and he told my mother, he said, "Would you go with me if we hocked our $20,000 life insurance policy and drilled a well there, because nobody else is going to drill it for me?" And he says, "They all think I'm crazy for thinking it's southeast of Conroe," and there were several major oil companies of the day who were drilling, looking for oil in the southwest of Conroe, but he wanted to go southeast. So he asked Mother if she would go with him if they would. He says, if it's not productive, I'll be on the street looking for a job. But if it is productive, you will be comfortable the rest of your life. And she says, on one condition: if you do hit it like you say you're going to hit, you'll never gripe about what I spend in stores ever. So
is your mother related to my wife?
So anyway, she finally said, "Let's go, let's do it." And I always say that they both kept their bargain. He found the oil, and she knew how to spend it, because I think when Mother died, I think all the stores in Houston flew their flags at half mast.
That kind of spirit in that era, this is 1930, 31.
31.
It's just.
It is. It was so typical of Texas, going back into history. I mean, there was Fehrenbach wrote an interesting book one time called 7 Keys to Texas. And I got a bunch of them, and they're out of print now, and I don't have any more, but told how Texas was farmed. First the explorers, then of the old cowboy who said,
Right.
"Give me a horse, a rope, a gun, and wide open spaces, and
No fences.
don't bother me." and then it had the cotton
Yep.
industry, and then it had the oil industry. And most of those guys in those days were not graduate geologists or graduate petroleum engineers, because there really wasn't much of that. And the fact that he came up in that environment, it was just a reflection, I think, of Texas, and even to the point where Texas came into the Union with the right to secede, and they came in as a republic with a freestanding nation. But that type in those days was the backbone of Texas.
It was a can-do attitude.
A can-do, and they said, "Look, give me a chance to spend my own money, and if I make it, let me keep it. And if I don't make it, don't feel sorry for me." And that was kind of the nature of,
Yep.
of my dad. So anyway, the stories that
Mr. Strake, let me stop you. So was
Sure.
he just walking? How did he wind up in that?
I asked him the
just
same
walking?
question. I asked him the same question. He would just walk back in those flats and
In those
everything. And he
woods.
was looking also in Hempstead, Texas. But what he saw in Conroe, he fell in love with. And I used to ask him that same question, because there was no geologist, there was the only form of seismic there was in that day, and there was a company that was operating up there, was what they call it, torsion balance. It was something that was discovered in World War I, when the Germans were trying to find out where the Allies were in the trenches and so forth. And there was one of those at work up in the Montgomery County area in the 1930 era when he was there, but he didn't have any of that, and it might have shown it, it might not have, who knows. But then the drilling of the well itself was quite a feat, because they had he found this guy Harvey Lee up in East Texas, which had a good reputation for being a good driller, and could feel the formation by just putting his hand on the brake, and knew whether they were going through hard or soft, or what kind of formation down below the
sand or shale or chert.
Yeah. And so he was told that a guy named Harvey Lee was the best driller in the state. And he said, "Where does he live?" And they said, "Somewhere up there in East Texas." So he started an automobile trip up and down the back roads of East Texas looking for this guy, Harvey Lee. He found, he was about to despair and give up on finding him, but he saw this lady out hanging clothes over the clothesline that she had just washed. And he got out of the car and he went over there. He said, "Ma'am," he said, "I hear there's a man named Harvey Lee that lives around here somewhere, and I'd like to, do you know where I might find him?" She looked down from hanging her laundry and she turned around and said, "Harvey, somebody here wants to talk to you." Well, that was Harvey Lee, and he had heard a good report about him, but he became, very fond of him. And he looked at him and he said, "Mr. Lee, I'm going to be drilling a well down in Conroe, oil well. I hear you're busy drilling water wells around this part of the country." But he said, "Would you consider going to work for me?" He said, "Well, how much you pay me?" And he said, "Well," and Harvey Lee said, he said, "How much you making now?" He said, "Well, I'm making $100 a month." He said, "Well, how about $300 a month?" He said, "When do I start?" He said, "In the morning." So that was the beginning of a friendship and a
the pay scale in the oil field's been the same ever since.
Now you almost get $300 a barrel. But Harvey Lee he apparently was a really good hands-on practical solution solver, and he went to work for him that day. Well, they had all kinds of problems. They had to bring a boiler across the highway that the highway weight that was posted was less than the weight of the truck with the boiler on it. So he didn't know how he was going to get it across. So I guess I can tell this now without retribution, but he said, a fellow that he knew up there in Conroe said, "I'll tell you what, the highway patrolman that works this route stops every morning at a coffee shop about 2 a.m. in Conroe. And I think I can get that thing across for you." So they went down, they even went under the bridge there, they walked out in there, and every time a truck would go over, they would shake like that. So anyway, at the given time, the truck showed up on the south side of the bridge, and at 2 a.m. they brought it across.
Is this a paved road?
It was a paved road. It was a road from Houston to Dallas, but it was Highway 75.
Oh, okay. So it was also, 75.
All right, so they got rigged up and everything. And then they had a problem. He purposely went and bought leases that allowed him to use the standing timber to fire the boiler on each location. And it was drilled on a plat that had been developed by a company out of Albany, New York, called the South Texas Development Company. And they had bought 40-acre tracts already designed on this map. And it was one of the first fields drilled on organized spacing like that. And so they were all set to go. They fired up the boiler, but they found that the boiler, putting this green pine tree, they call them 6-foot gas, they didn't have draft going up. So what they did, one of the guys that worked for him said, "Mr. Strake, I think I can solve that for you." So he went to, he said, "Why don't you go on town and get a sandwich or something?" So he ended up shooting a 12-gauge shotgun through the flue, which allowed more draft coming in, and the fire department wasn't crazy about that concept, but it worked, and everybody lived happily ever after.
How far was this from Conroe?
Where the location is?
Yes, sir.
I'd say from the city hall, it's about maybe a mile and a half.
Mile and a half?
Yeah, where the discovery well was.
Right, okay.
And so anyway, it came down to the last day because they had all kinds of trouble. Dad didn't have the money to pay the rent. I mean, to pay a rental, which was due. So they, Harvey Lee came to the rescue again, and he said, "I think we can get this thing started by hand spudding it." And so they rigged it up so that they could dig, I think it was the first maybe 25 feet.
So just walking in a circle?
Walking in circles, and they were all pushing on the rig and turning it to the right. And that was good because he didn't have the money to pay rentals, which were due on that spud date. I think the spud date was like, he always loved the 13th. 13, he said, was his lucky number because they started the they started the well on September 13th, and October 13th he hit one of his key geological markers, and on December 13th the thing came roaring in. But anyway, so it was an interesting history of how that thing actually got drilled, but you know, a lot of forks in the road.
That's
we
right.
took.
That's right. Where did the rig come from? Who owned the rig?
You know, I don't know. I don't know who that where the rig came from, but it was it's one of those old wooden rigs, you know.
But to drill to the total depth was 5,100.
It was like 49.50. Yeah.
Was the pay?
And the first well, what he called the discovery well, was really a gas well, but that irritated the fire out of him when people claimed it was a gas well, because it came in at, I don't know, 20,000 cubic feet a day and about 115 barrels of condensate. And even then, people didn't really believe he had a big oil field. And it wasn't until he drilled the second well, a mile south of the first one, that they really hit the mother lode, and they came in about 5,000 barrels of oil a day.
Did he ever mention why? What was his bearing to go to that 1 mile location? Was it just instinct?
No, but he never did mention that to me, and I'm not sure why he did it, but he still wanted to sell the half interest, because he drilled several wells himself, and then he went to Humble to see if they would be interested, and they looked at it and they tested it, and I think they still had some apprehensions, but Wallace Pratt and was a person there at Humble that he swore by, and there was another guy, maybe I'll think of his name in a minute, but he always had a lot of admiration for the Humble people. He said the only reason you put your agreement in writing was in case one of you got run over by a train.
Right.
Your heirs and descendants would know what you had agreed to. But he had a lot of respect for all the people at Humble. And
you recall what the price of oil may have been in 1931?
it was selling at 10 cents a barrel in East Texas. And
here we are in the year of our Lord 2012, and it's selling for what, Mr. Strake?
$100.
$100 a barrel.
Plus.
$100 a barrel.
And you know, they were running hot oil out of the East Texas oil field, and that was, the government was sending people down to check on that, and you know, why anybody would continue drilling at that with those difficult barriers to cross.
There was known gas.
Thank goodness he did.
Right. There was known gas, but the goal was oil.
Well, And the gas, and like I said, the one of the things that helped him too was this W.T. Moran, grandfather of a friend of mine, Pat Moran. He had a service station on what was then Texas Highway 75, I think.
Right.
And he put up a little cracker plant on the back of his service station, and they piped the oil and the gas from that discovery well over. I think it was a mile or two that he had to go to the highway to get it. And
So he was distilling
he got that money. I mean, he got the money in order to pay the rentals, so he didn't lose the lease. So
So they were actually distilling right there at the
right
in Conroe.
right
At the
in
little
Conroe.
plant.
And then, of course, the word got out that he had hit something really big, and then apparently things just started flowing his way. And to the day he died, he kept thinking about. He said, "Well, wait a minute." He said, "We have 640 acres in there. There's 40 acres of track. We'll have room for maybe 16 wells on that." Well, I came through the era when you were lucky to get a 2 or 3 well barrel.
That's
I
right.
mean, 2 or 3 well
That's right.
field. And but to the day he died, he was always looking for another one like
Another
it.
one. I read in some of the research I did that before 1931 there was no Texas Railroad Commission.
No, there wasn't. There
And
wasn't.
because if you looked at pictures in East Texas of Kilgore, the rigs were
Yeah,
right
together.
beside each other.
Yeah.
But it,
And like I say, they used this plat that had been developed for real estate purposes by this Albany company to drill on 40-acre tracts. So it was drilled about as
right.
orderly as you possibly could. And like you say,
Unlike
there's
Kilgore.
unlike Kilgore or California, where
Right.
they were just the derrick floors were just jammed up together.
Yeah. All producing out of the same pool.
Yeah, and boy, just think now we're drilling horizontally
Yeah.
6,000 feet down and 6,000 feet out, and fracking into these shale sands that are just almost like concrete.
It's quite amazing from
It is.
my little experience and your obviously in-depth knowledge of what they can do now to produce oil and gas is extraordinary.
It is.
It's just like going to the moon almost.
And you know who I give a lot of credit for is George Mitchell.
Yeah.
He's the
Sure.
one that gave the order to frack this. You know, he used to
I read
provide Chicago with 2/3 of their gas from his fields up in Jack and Wise County, and Texas, and he would pipe it to Chicago and supply most of the gas for the city of Chicago. But and that just within the last 5 years, you know, he was drilling in these shales, and he called his drilling superintendent one day. And he said, "Joe," he said, "I want you to frack that shale we're going through." He said, "You got to be kidding! You don't mean that, do you?"
Yeah, like you said, it's
So
like concrete.
he hung up, and he didn't. The drilling superintendent didn't do it. So Mr. Mitchell saw the report come in on that well, and it had no evidence that it was fracked. He called a guy up. He said, "Let me tell you something. I'm paying for this thing. I said to do it. You do it, or you find another job." And that's what really set this whole shale play off.
That's right.
And it's a whole new world now. It's changed us from being an import nation to where one of these days we're going to be exporting oil and gas again.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But-
The tales of the Conroe oil field that Sam and I've heard growing up in Conroe, of course, was the benefit that the Conroe field had during World War II.
Well, this story is one that my dad used to tell,
Ah, okay.
and I'm assuming it was true. And I think it was, but it's so bizarre you can't believe it. But it was thought, and maybe still is, where the oil that comes out of the ground at Conroe is high in something called toluene, which it was is supposed to be good for naval aviation.
To make
A
jet fuel?
person who claimed that he was representing Adolf Hitler came to my dad and said that Adolf Hitler would like to consider buying the Conroe Field. And Dad, that was before anybody knew who Hitler was.
Right.
And apparently it was like 1937, 38. So Dad was going to go to Germany. In fact, he and my mother were planning on a trip to Germany, and he to talk to them, whether it was going to be Hitler himself or his men or what. But he said he got a funny feeling about it because there was some bad preliminary reports coming in about this man Adolf Hitler in the mid-30s, and so they decided to cancel it. But just think how that would have maybe changed World War II
That's
or,
right. That's right.
or that era.
Because we know that the Nazis were starving for petroleum.
Yes, yeah, and they were frantic for it, and they heard this was good aviation fuel, and so it would have been a bad deal. But fortunately, they canceled their tickets to. They were going to go over on the Queen Elizabeth or something like that.
It was one of the biggest in the world when it came in, was it not?
It ultimately was the third largest field in the country.
Wow.
And it started the LaGuardia Hochliensis production zone that follows the whole coast of Texas, Louisiana, into Alabama, Mississippi and Alabama.
Yep. Yep.
And they used to not think that was productive, but it changed everything. Changed everything.
I had read in one of the internet websites about the Conroe oil field that in 62 years it had produced more than 717 million barrels of oil.
And what year was that?
To 93.
Right, 93. I think it's up to in excess of 1 billion barrels of oil.
And it's still producing in the 5,000? Have they had to go deeper?
Denbury bought that field, and they're planning on a CO2 flood.
I've heard that.
And that's amazing to me that it's still going.
But it's at the same pay zone.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like Saudi Arabia. They call it the Arab D.
Right.
It's like
and
4,000 foot.
They've tried to find oil deeper, but they haven't succeeded at it. I think Gulf or somebody, Gulf Oil, drilled a deeper well, but I don't think anybody's succeeded in finding any oil deeper.
Incredible.
It is.
It is.
Just
I mean,
flat.
to have that kind of numbers out of a field of that.
And just think of the cubic feet of gas that were flared because there was no market for it.
That's right. And again, was that the Railroad Commission who eventually
Yeah, they were the ones that
made everybody
got that
turn the
thing.
tap and do something with the gas?
Yeah.
Tell us about some your young days growing up in Houston.
Well, this is something that happened, but I wasn't aware of it at the time. But we were in the Depression. Houston, Texas had not suffered like Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, but apparently people knew it was existing. I mean, I didn't. I was born in 1935, so. But the Ku Klux Klan was pretty active around here, and there was 3 groups of people they didn't like. One was blacks, one was Jews, and one was Catholics, and we fit into the third category there. So I can remember we lived in a nice home out there in River Oaks, which my mom and dad could afford to buy at that time, and apparently there were some rumors or death threats or threats to kidnap myself and my 2 sisters. So they put a fence around the house, and they got a litter of Belgian Shepherd dogs. And I can remember one of the dogs was named Amos, and the only person that dog ever bit was me. So he kind of got his targets a little confused. But there was concern about it because he was in the paper a lot, and people were, struggling big time. And but I will say this: you remember I said he put $2 of the $10 he earned weekly. Yep. He sort of lived that way his whole life, and he did make a lot of money. He did not make the money everybody thought he made, but he gave a ton of money away. And he remember he used to say, God doesn't care how much you made when you were here, but he wants to know what you did with what you had while you were here.
That's right.
And he, a lot of the things here in town, he started on the verge of. I remember a story. Eddie Skurlock, that was an old oil name. He called my dad one time, and this must have been in the late 50s, early 60s. And he said, George, he said, we've got an area out here on North Houston here where there's, it's kind of a tough neighborhood, and Boys and Girls Club want to maybe build a club out there. It's really important. It's really kind of a tough spot, and I want you to get behind it. And he said, well, Eddie, how much are you giving? He said, well, I'm thinking about giving $5,000. He kind of talked slow. And Dad said, I thought you said it was really important. He said, well, it is. You need to give. He said, well, if it's that important, why don't you give 100 and I'll give 100 and we'll get it built. And that's the way that club out, Boys and Girls Club, which one of my sons is now on the board of
Good.
Here in town.
I think one of the hospitals your dad also was a benefactor to.
Well, he was. And you remember at the beginning of this interview, I said I would have had a brother a year and a half older than me. What happened was he had two girls, Susie, my oldest sister, Jana, the next child, and then he had this third baby that was a baby boy that died 2 days after he was born of asthma. And he was so shook up about, my dad was so shook up about losing a son. He had the world in the palm of his hand, but God decided that he would take away the thing he really said he wanted a lot, which was would have been my older brother. And there was a Sister Phillip down here at St. Joseph Hospital that came in, and he baptized. She saw the baby wasn't doing well, and she baptized that baby and picked the name George after my dad.
Right.
And my mother and dad were so grateful for that the rest of their life that probably the biggest recipient of Strake dollars over the years has been St. Joseph Hospital. But he really felt a strong obligation that you're a custodian of your money, you're not the owner of it, and that you're judged on what you do with it, not how many cars you had or how much money you spent on yourself. So he's left all of us a reputation for being community minded, and for that I'm grateful.
Yeah, I've read the term. I was actually looking at the website of the Houston Club, and the term that was there was great families with great hearts.
Yeah.
And those were the members of the Houston Club, which included obviously the Strake family.
By the way, that club now has lost their lease over here and looking for a new building.
I read that in the Chronicle.
Yeah.
I sure did. I thought of all places, what institutions that the real estate market gets. What are they going to do with the space?
I think they're probably going to tear that building down.
Oh my God.
Probably build a skyscraper.
Building new.
Yeah.
So do you recall as a young man, did your dad bring you up to Conroe?
I was too young. There's pictures of my two sisters that were up there, and they were both real young. And I was born in 35. I guess I was 4 years old. But interestingly enough, I had kind of a hard time growing up under that kind of a family environment. I've since gotten over it.
It's good.
But if I'd be made captain of the softball team at recess or something like that, and somebody said, "You got that because your old man has money," it was automatically a swing at your chin.
That's right.
And I had this feeling I wanted to make it on my own. But let me tell you this little interesting story about my growing up under that environment. I wanted to get what I got on my own without on the name.
Right.
So I chose to go. I was admitted to Notre. I was looking at the Naval Academy, Notre Dame, Santa Clara, and University of Hawaii. Now that had to be a joke. My dad would have given me a one-way ticket to Hawaii, and said, "Go there, good luck, and we'll see you in eternity." But I wanted to make it on my own, and so that was a struggle. I went through college, Navy, Harvard Business School, and I was interviewing other companies to work for, and one of them was Humble. I would have been over in New Orleans, I guess, selling cans of oil up now at I-10 or something. Mm-hmm. The other one was Winston-Salem, which was in Carolina, and I interviewed with them because they were non-union. I liked that. I eliminated about 60% of the job interviews at Harvard because I said I wouldn't live in New York City, so that was a feeding ground for the New York types. And so anyway, I ended up in my deciding, it was 6 weeks before I was about to graduate from Harvard Business School, and it dawned on me, I read a book about Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur was the son of a Army general who was prominent in the Indian Wars out west, later transferred to the Philippines. Douglas, the son, looks at his dad, and he says, there's no way I can be him, perhaps, but I'm going to try. And Douglas then became one of the great generals we had in World War II in the Philippines and later in Korea and so forth. He has a son, which I understand, threw up his hands and said, I can never be them. And he ended up, I think the poor fellow's an alcoholic nowadays, and just kind of a ne'er-do-well. And another thing impressed me, Christ himself lived on this planet for 30 plus years, and he didn't accomplish everything he was to accomplish. So I figured you're going to be on this earth either one day or 100 years, a relatively short time in the terms of eternity. So why not come back to Houston, where I think my folks had built up a reputation for integrity, and the money part really didn't bother me. But they had built this platform of integrity, and I said, we've got such a short time to live on this planet, that why not go back and jump on that platform of integrity and try to go from there. And because I had a lot of people say, man, your dad was tough to deal with, but he said I never heard anybody say he was dishonest or anything.
But he had heart.
Yeah, and and I had a simple aspiration when I was growing up. I just wanted to change the world.
Yeah.
And
we all had youthful ideas, didn't we?
Oh yeah, yeah. And so there's so many things left to do, that you can accomplish, and you ought to try. And you can edit this out if you want, but Bill Clements walked into my life in 1978, and that changed it pretty dramatically.
How so?
Well, I had never heard of him before. Well, I had heard of him, but the guy who eventually became governor, Bill Clements, 1979,
right.
He was elected governor. Well, in February of 70...
In a long time to be elected governor, right?
Pardon?
First Republican to be elected.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was first Republican in 100 years, and the other one was appointed by the government after the Civil War. But on February 6th of 1978, Bill Clements called up here in my office and wanted to meet with me. So I said, sure, where? So we said, well, how about that little library room over in the Houston Club? So went over there and was supposed to meet him at 2 o'clock, and nobody was there. So I waited, and it got to be 2:10, and nobody was there. Finally, it was 2:15. I said, gosh darn, I have more to do than sit over here waiting for this guy to come visit. And so I was walking out of the door to go to the elevator on the 8th floor of the Houston Club building, and I saw a very sharp-looking young Hispanic guy. And he said, "Are you Mr. Strake?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, Mr. Clements is running a little bit late. Please wait for him." And I said, "Well, I've really got a lot of things going on, and I don't know whether I can do that." But I went back, and sure enough, Bill Clements shows up. So he and I sat down, just a little small talk for a few minutes. And then he said, "George, I'm running for governor, and I need your help." And I said, "Well, to be frank with you, there's 3 things I don't like about you." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, number 1, I hear you voted for Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater. Don't like that. Number 2, I hear that you are telling people that we're on parity with the Soviet Union militarily." And I said, I've been president of the Navy League, and I haven't heard that at all. And number 3, I hear that you approved the giveaway of the Panama Canal. And he said, "Well, number 1, I will tell you this, that I did vote for Johnson over Goldwater because I thought it was important to have a Texan in the White House." And he said, "I made a mistake." That is the first and only time I ever heard Bill Clements say he made a mistake. So I said, "Okay, I'll go there." And secondly, he said, "I was Deputy Secretary of Defense, and I signed into being the cruise missile, and we're now on a parity with the Soviet Union." And I said, "Well, it's not what I hear as head of the Navy League, but you were Deputy Secretary of Defense, so I'll believe you." Thirdly, he said, this is like on a Tuesday, he said, "I want you to watch television Friday." He said, my friend Animal Moore and I are going to go before Senator Sinis's Senate Internal Security Subcommittee to say that if we don't retain unilateral right to go back into the Panama Canal, if it's in our national self-interest, then I will withdraw my support. So, okay, I go to my television set on Friday, and sure enough, that's what happened. So on February 16th, we part. February 16th, he comes up here again, my office. And we talk, and I find out a little more about him and everything. And I'm thinking, what does this guy want me to do? So finally, on February, he leaves. February 26th, he wants to come back. So I was thinking, what is going on here? Why did he get to the point? So on the 26th, he comes back, and he told me about his life and some of the things he's done. And he said, "George, I want you to be my state campaign chairman." I said, you got to be kidding." I said, "I'm not that well known here in Harris County, and not known at all in the rest of the 253 other counties." So I said, "I think you can do better than that." He said, "No, you let me decide that." So I went home that night, and I told my wife Annette, I said, "Babe, I'm gonna be the campaign chairman, state campaign chairman, for a guy named Bill Clements who's going to run for governor." She said, "Bill who?"
Yeah, who's that?
I said, "You will know who Bill who is in November," because I said he's going to be like a Panzer division coming out of the Ardennes Forest. I said, it's going to be impressive. And I said, number 1, he knows business because he took $20,000 in borrowed money and built it into the largest offshore drilling company in the world, Sedco. Number 2, he's president of the Boy Scout Council up there, so he knows the charity world. Number 3, he's been in Washington, so he knows the Washington scene. And number 4, he can pay for his own race. So
quite unusual.
I said, and I said yes, I'll be his chairman. She said, "Well, do what you have to do." Well, during the course of the campaign, that was a real trip, I'll tell you. But we got about halfway through the campaign, and I talked to him one day, and I said, "Bill, I think you're going to win this thing." And I said, "I want a favor from you." And he said, "What's that?" I said, I want you to take my name out of your Rolodex and throw it away and forget we've ever met. And I want you to go to Austin and be honest and be conservative and leave me alone. I later found out that's how you get jobs from the guy, because after he had been elected, he was not sworn in yet, and it was in late '78, December, I think. So I hadn't heard from him for a month after the election, and so we were up in Colorado skiing. We have a wife. I have a wife and 6 kids were there. 2:30, should have been out skiing, but instead didn't get through with luncheon time. Phone rings, and it's Bill Clements on the phone. He said, George, where are you? I said, I'm up in Colorado. What are you doing? I said, I'm up here skiing.
Sounds like you.
Well, he said, when are you coming home? I said, tomorrow. He said, I want you to be Secretary of State. I said, you got to be kidding. I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't, that's just not my thing. No, he said, I don't want that answer. He said, I want you to come up here. So that was like on Wednesday. So I drove up to Austin, sat across the desk from him in that little office he had rented 2 blocks south of the Capitol. And I said, Bill, I've been thinking about this thing. And I said, it's a pretty heady offer. I mean, I'd be the first Republican in 100 years, Secretary of State. I'd be the successor of Stephen F. Austin. And I said, but I'll tell you what, I've got 6 young kids at home. I've got a little business I'm running. I'm in a lot of charity things in Houston. And I'm just not the kind of guy that picks up and changes courses like that. And I thought he was going to say, I think you're making a mistake, George, but I wish you would. He looked at me and he said, George, I think you're in a rut. So the following Monday, I was in the Capitol with his hand up and this on the Bible. I had to have somebody show me where the men's room was. But anyway, it was a great experience.
Good experience?
And, oh, yeah. It was. I was there for 2 years and 9 months. And just, the whole state turned Republican.
Yep. It was a turn.
And then at a meeting I didn't attend after I'd come off the Secretary of State's deal, I was, I ran for lieutenant governor in '82 and came in second in a 2-man race against Bill Hobby, who was like, but the reason I did was because it dawned on me that the state of Texas was not going to be Republican until we elected a second human being, different than Bill Clements, to be governor, or won the lieutenant governor's seat. And I remember when I was talking to him about running for lieutenant governor, I said, I'm not going to do it if it's going to jeopardize your reelection. And he said, no, I don't think it'll bother me. He said, have you taken a poll? I said, no, I haven't taken a poll because I'm either going to do it or not do it, because I said, I'm aware of the long shot that it is, but I'm also aware of the fact there has to be a few dead Marines on the beach before you can secure the island. So anyway, that was another interesting phase.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
That one you ought to interview my wife on. She's got more stories on that.
Sam has run for office, and I was a city councilman in the
but then you all know that
Panorama Village of 2,000 people.
Mr. Drake, I came in second in a 2-man race, but my opponent came in next to the last.
I like that.
What was your, you want to talk briefly about your time in the Navy for Next Generation?
Yes. I happen to know the guy who designed the all-volunteer military. His name is Bo Calloway. He used to be governor of Georgia.
Okay.
And he told me what he was doing, and I said, Bo, I don't like that idea. I said, I think it puts us in a position where too few people are paying too big a price to maintain our freedom, and we're not educating our kids, especially our male kids, that freedom is not something you just inherit automatically. It's something you have to work at maintaining, and I really feel that way now. Whew. So I said, I really think that it's important. And I said, I tell you my point of view. I said, I got out of Notre Dame. I got a commission when I graduated. I was assigned to an LST, and that whole process changed my whole life.
Of course.
Because when I was growing up, I was 6 to 10 years old during World War II. And I thought every yellow person with slant eyes was a sniper shooting at John Wayne in the palm tree. And I just disliked the whole nation. And so I was assigned when I got out to an LST out of San Diego. And 2 days after I got on, we set sail for well, the first time we went to Hawaii, and then we came back. And the first time we went to Japan, and all over the Western Pacific for 6 months. And all of a sudden, here I am, George Strake, and I realized I was in charge of 15 people's lives.
Okay.
When I was officer of the deck underway, I was in charge of 280 guys' lives, and it just wakes you up and makes you realize that this thing we call America and freedom aren't automatics. And I remember the first time somebody called me Mister. I went, "Who are you talking to?" Because I was George. But it really makes you realize that you got to pay a price to and I have 6 wonderful kids. They've not been to the military, and they happen to be all good kids. But if they get sick of me pounding on them about
freedom's not free.
Freedom isn't free.
That's right.
And and then I see these guys coming back all shot up from Afghanistan and everywhere like that, and I just have such gratitude to them for doing that and exposing themselves to that. So, but I think the country would be a stronger, better, more self-reliant nation if at least the male children in this country we live in would have to. And if you don't want to carry a weapon, about 6 out of 7 don't ever carry weapons anyway. So there's plenty of ways you can serve, and I encourage and appreciate the young people who do it today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you somewhere along the line you have 6 kids. You obviously married 53 years ago.
53 years ago this month. Yeah.
She was Houston.
Yeah.
Houston lady.
Right. She was Annette DeWalch.
Okay.
Changed her name to Strake.
Ah, good for her. Good for her. And your 6 children, are they in close proximity?
Well, 4 of them live here. One of them lives in Austin. One of them in Dallas. And
good.
We have 17 grandchildren.
Oh, my
so
God.
we're kind of keeping the
That's
grocery
a lot to keep up with.
It is.
Yeah, I bet.
It's been fun.
As we kind of close down, I always
Sure.
try to end these interviews with kind of a leading question. As we talk to the camera, the life that you've lived, the legacy that you've left to your children, to this state and to this city, what would you tell the future? What would you tell the ladies and gentlemen, the boys and girls that'll see this tape next year or 2
Sure.
years or 3 years from now?
I'll give you some of the stories that my kids are sick of hearing. First of all, I always tell them that failing is not in falling, but in failing to rise again. They're sick of that saying. There was another, when I played football over at St. Thomas, and we used to use the field that the University of Houston uses now, and there was a sign in the dressing room, I remember, just hanging on the wall, kind of half crooked, and it said, "I had no shoes and I complained until I saw a man who had no feet."
That's right.
So my theory is, let me tell you another story. I ran for lieutenant governor in 1982.
Okay.
The election watch was at the Hyatt Hotel up in Austin. So, in the course of the night, we figure out that I came in second in a 2-man race. And so the next morning, Annette and I were walking to our car in the parking lot. And I looked up and I saw that Air Force sign on the billboard. said, aim higher. I turned to Annette and I said, that's my problem. She said, don't get any funny
No more
ideas.
ideas. No more ideas. Come home.
No, and another thing, I had an experience where I got kind of a flood hit me in the when the FDIC was suing all the bank directors in the country, and I was on the Republic Bank Shares Board in Dallas and the Republic Bank Shares here in Houston. And I was going to lunch one day, and Belinda, who works for me then and now, she said, the business reporter from Channel 2 is on the phone and wanted to know what you're going to do about the lawsuit. I said, what lawsuit? She said, you're being sued apparently for being on the bank board, the FDIC, and all the directors are being sued from anywhere from 55 million to 98 million, and mine was like 64 million. And when Belinda told me that, I said, well, I'll tell you what, go back and tell her that if they're suing me for $100,000, I'm worried sick. But if they're suing me for 62 million, I'm going to go to lunch. There's nothing I can do about that. There's just so much meat on the bone. But I went through some tough financial times then, and I know my son heard somebody tell him one time. He said, well, I never heard your dad do anything crooked or shady or whatever to recover from that experience. So I've always told them, and I'm saying this to every one of you out there, you can make a fortune, and with a little bad luck you can lose it, with a little good luck you can regain it. But once you lose your reputation for integrity, you can't ever, Humpty Dumpty can't ever put that together again.
Very true.
So my theory is love this country, be willing to sacrifice for it, be willing to take on the tough jobs, keep your integrity, and you'll die a happy man.
Okay. Mr. Strake?
Good.
Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
This is Butch Bateman. In conclusion of the interview with Mr. George Strake in Houston, Texas, on the year of our Lord 2012, we bid you farewell.